kept saying?
It's Diara.
Oh, DR. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. So it seems like the overarching thing that kind of ignited a lot of people in my group was the death of George Floyd. A lot of members in my group kind of talked about how that kind of ignited them to kind of dig deep and have these conversations. For me in particular, as a Black woman, I mean, I've been in my skin forever, so I've been ignited since birth. But it was really interesting to hear the perspectives of a lot of our counterparts, you know, saying that this ongoing racial unrest is really what ignited them to kind of participate in like these COTAD series.
Yeah. Was there any discussion about, obviously we're dealing with the impact of George Floyd, but just also, you know, because this has happened time and time again, but with us being in this COVID-19 situation where you're kind of you're limited on what you can do. Did you guys talk about how that kind of played a role maybe? Or was that a factor at all?
Yeah, we actually didn't really talk about COVID, believe it or not. Our group was pretty focused on like doing a lot of internal work and having difficult conversations. So we didn't really focus the narrative on the pandemic per se, but rather educating and doing internal work.
Excellent. Okay. Any other group members want to comment from different groups?
I can go for my group. Kind of going off of what everyone has said so far. Actually, these series has helped a lot of the people in my group kind of start chapters of their own at their schools, and seeing the lack of diversity within their OT programs have really ignited a lot of them to take that on and try and change within their own programs.
Gotcha. Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think just actually going off what Molly said, like seeing the like silence of like with a lot of my classmates was like pretty troubling and like frightening. So I think at that point I was like, okay, like, you know, turning my focus like, you know, into my own world of OT, right? Because it's like, yes, I might want to, you know, dismantle things in every like part of society, but like realistically, like what can I do? And OT is like one of those worlds I'm in. So, you know, I think I started to kind of like look more inwards, and then was like, okay, like I see my classmates, you know, and I want to try and influence them as much as I can.
For sure. All right, so the second question, describe one thing that you have done to combat racism since the start of the series.
I will start for my group. There was a lot. I was furiously writing, hearing microaggressions from around and speaking up, feeling more confident in doing that, having sessions with students from underrepresented minority groups at high schools in the area to acquaint them with OT. One group has established a few students as the liaisons between the rest of the students and the faculty, specifically for issues of racism and discrimination during field work. And another group has started a PTE journal club that's focusing on BIPOC researchers, and has also started a podcast club that started on BIPOC and DEI initiatives.
Hey, Stephanie, really fast, could you define BIPOC for folks who might not be aware of that term?
Yes. So when we talk about that, we're talking about people who are Black and African American and people of color.
Excellent, excellent. I said, Diara, just raised her hand.
Yeah, that is me. So I mentioned this earlier, but my group was really it looked like our theme was like doing a lot of internal work and educating themselves and really making sure they're having these uncomfortable conversations. I know there was one group member who, or several group members rather, that were kind of having these conversations with their family members or friends that don't necessarily agree with them, and that's difficult. Some other members were talking about how, you know, they're making sure that they are educating themselves a little bit more, myself included. I've been trying to read more, you know, in terms of combating racism. There was another OT who was a part of the academic setting who was talking about, you know, making sure he's advocating for and participating in these anti-racist forums for the needs of his students. So it seems like a lot of people in my group were really focused on combating racism through, you know, providing resources for other people or even providing those resources for themselves. And to clarify, BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. That's what the acronym stands for.
Great. All right, Molly, you have the floor.
Okay. So we had a lot of great leaders in our group. Some of the things that some of the people have done, a lot of people talked about like creating COTAD chapters at their OT program, like I stated before, but also there was some people who had podcast clubs, and not just within OT, but across other professions coming together. They also, one girl said in her COTAD group, they were having a mini Ignite series with OT, PT, and PA students. So I thought that was a really great idea. Some other things, people were reading a lot of different books and hosting discussion groups. So again, trying to educate themselves and find ways to spread that throughout their community.
Great way to spread that information around. And how about for the last group? If not, we can move on to the third question. All right, so next, share 2 things that you have seen or done or found to be helpful in combating racism. What are some of the things you guys talked about in your groups? All right, DR, you have the floor.
Am I talking too much? Okay.
No, we know that you've got great insight, so please.
So again, my group was really big on, you know, education. You know, that's probably the most powerful, I think, thing we all can do. Education, and then also having these uncomfortable conversations. And I know I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but in order to really advocate for, you know, marginalized bodies and really dissect how these systems of oppression and systemic racism really work, we need to be having these conversations, educating ourselves. So that's pretty much, again, what my group kind of focused on. And if I'm lying, somebody pitch in.
No, but I love that. I mean, because how do you fix a problem? How do you start the conversation of even, you know, where do we go from here without understanding it? So if you can't have those discussions, if you can't have that understanding, then you're pretty much doomed. So that's great. Anybody else have anything to share? Amanda.
Stacy, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, no, just something really quick I thought was interesting is we had a faculty member in our group, and something that she mentioned was just, besides just students speaking out about things that should be included in our program, having a faculty also advocate for that, because sometimes there's a power dynamic between faculty and students. So if there's another faculty helping the students make the program be more diverse or inclusive and equitable, that can be really helpful.
Definitely. Thank you for that.
We also, I was in the Iris group. We also had 2 faculty members in our group. One of them, his school has started a COTAD chapter, which is great. And the second faculty member spoke about the need for resources, further resources to be more to have more intersectionality in the resources that are provided to her students. So that was a little bit of what we spoke about. To add to Ziara's point, a lot of the discussion was about how to combat our own implicit biases and the type of work we're doing, even with our own homes, and how we're having these uncomfortable conversations with our family members. So a lot of our discussion was centered around those topics.
Gotcha. I love that talk about the implicit bias, just kind of understanding, those things that might not be as aware to ourselves, just to be able to, internalize and, bring out, these things that we need to work on, because everybody, if you have a brain, you have a bias. So everybody has a bias, and we don't necessarily know the things we need to work on, but different tests like the implicit bias test can definitely help us to kind of work towards, being more inclusive within ourselves and discovering that. So great. Anyone else want to expand on what their group have shared, anything that they found to be helpful for combating racism? May have covered it all. We'll move on to question 4. So name 3 things that you will do moving forward.
Before we even go into that question, there's been some really good chatter in the chat. Dominique had mentioned it's almost like becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations. Educating, being honest, being receptive, being optimistic. These are really great. Yeah, lean in. Oh, now they're going. You guys can just unmute yourselves and say these. There's only a small group of us tonight. And feel free to state your comments. I don't want to miss them. I see that we had Nevada OT Association. Well, we love it. Has created a diversity committee to understand our needs and start the conversation. That's awesome. Awesome. I remember going to the conference there one year. So really cool. We never going to learn if we were always comfortable. Yes, right, Cassandra. I'm not going to say these. You guys unmute yourself. You guys got this. These are really good
It doesn't have to be
comments.
limited to the group leaders. Anybody can jump in.
Yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
I was saying that you guys don't have to limit it to the group leaders or whoever was designated to talk. Anybody can feel free to jump in. This is a small enough group that I feel like we can have this discussion in a larger context, and we don't have to, fight for, who's going to talk or whatever the case may be. So
I like to use the chat because I have a lot to say, but I don't want to monopolize the dialogue. So I love to hear what other people have to say and listen. But I did want to, just with the state association comment, we're working on a kind of a toolkit or a template for state conferences where you at your state conference could host a discussion on diversity, and we would give you kind of a format or a framework that you could use for that. But I'm looking for a collaborator. So if you are a student or a clinician or an educator that's interested in helping to bring this this vision to reality, please shoot me a message, and I would love to have someone to help get that going.
Excellent. Cassandra, see your hand raised.
Hi, I just had a quick question. I know we talked about BIPOC, but I also heard somebody say DEI. I didn't know what that acronym meant, and I just wanted to know if somebody could let me know what it meant.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Diversity, equity, inclusion.
Cool. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great question.
And we had a question come up in the chat. Christina, can you repeat your request? I think is what it said.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a collaborator to help with moving forward a COTAD state initiative where we would create a template. I'll put it in the chat. So shoot me a message if you're interested.
Would anyone else like to share what they'll be doing moving forward? Anything that we've skipped or we haven't mentioned yet?
Something that one of the OTs in my group was talking about, she works in the school setting. And she was talking about how a lot of, one of the Ignite series or somewhere she said that they were talking about kind of like more outreach programs or kind of like job fairs. So she really wanted to do one with her students just to spread the word about OT in that way to get more kids interested at a younger age.
I think that's very important. That's great. We often find that a lot of people, I know this is personal to me, just people of particularly African Americans that I've spoken to, when I always ask them, well, what got you into occupational therapy? It's always, well, I was interested in this, but then I discovered OT. It's never, oh yeah, I grew up as, a third grader. I wanted to be an OT. So I think just being able to spread that information out that, one, occupational therapy is a profession. Two, this is what occupational therapy is. We're not providing therapy for in the job or whatever. There's a lot of misconceptions around OT. So I definitely think that's an area that I'm very passionate about. Just kind of disseminate that information to elementary school kids, middle school kids, high schoolers, and things like that. I'll kind of speak a little bit on what I've been doing kind of moving forward. So I'm a part of a diversity and inclusion committee at my job. And with that, everything that's been going on, I've really been using that kind of to catapult to, have the ears of the president, the CEO of the hospitals. And we've been having discussions about creating these groups, a group for people in the hospital. So anybody that's an employee, just like they can have an open forum to say, this is what's going on. This is how my experience is as a Black man, as a member of the LGBTQ community, just spreading that and having a listening ear. I think what we lack is, especially in different roles and different in different industries. So for me, administration doesn't necessarily hear the problem of the people. And so we're creating this committee so that people can, express what's going on and how we can make it a more inclusive environment. And then also having a component of the community. So reaching out to the community for community members to be able to say, when I enter your hospital, this is what makes me feel uncomfortable, or these are the things that you guys are doing better, or this is some things I'd like to see change, so that we can kind of reflect the community around us and just be, better attuned to handle the needs of the community. So does anybody have any other examples they would like to share of what they're doing moving forward? All right, so let's talk about accountability partners. With that, has anybody identified or what are you guys looking for in accountability partners? Oh, I'm stuttering. What do you guys think about having that person that you can kind of go to for accountability, and how do you guys see that being enacted moving forward?
I'll jump in on this one, Stacy. In my group, we talked about having something on the calendar and how that kind of keeps people accountable. So one person said that she meets with a group of a few other people and they have something on the calendar every couple of weeks to meet and talk about these kind of issues. And another person was talking about her student group that has meetings regularly on the calendar for journal clubs and podcast clubs and things that have to do with the issues we're talking about tonight.
That's excellent. Very practical.
So in that way, I guess the calendar is kind of an accountability partner.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anyone else have anything to share about accountability? I see in the chat.
In the chat, yeah. That's good. Read that, Stacy. That looks good.
Yeah, so I am going to screw up this name. I'm going to try. Forgive me, Miss Cox. But this says, hi, this is Prabha Cox from Nevada OT Association, chair of the diversity committee. I would be interested in accountability. To me, any policy or initiative that is on paper is not enough. Follow through and consistency is key. Oh no, what happened to my, oh, is key to the success. Sorry, my screen just went out. I don't know what's going on. Can everybody see me? Okay. So yeah, that follow through. So it's not enough just to have something on paper, right? We got to follow through with it, and you know, the best plan is not going to work if there's no follow through with that. So thank you for that feedback. Any last thoughts on these topics? Anything that we've missed, or any topic that you guys heard in the group that you just want to kind of get out? Oh, it seems like Miss Cox tried to chime in, but her sound is not working. Okay.
I have a actually quick thing. I've been taking an elective where I've had to look at the ACOT standards like pretty extensively. And something I think I'd like love to see in the future is that ACOT adds some kind of like standards on like anti-racist and bias curriculum. And like I've been doing some like really preliminary research on like how like students could even advocate for this. I'm like, do we like write a letter and get a petition going? Like, do you guys have any like recommendations? Because I mean, I've looked at those standards so much, and it's not covering some like really essential things. And you know, again, people are gonna have their views around whatever's happening in the world, but things like bias and like anti-racism, like every healthcare provider need to like, there's, you know, just those certain things they need to know to be practicing like ethically.
Christina, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. And about 5 people responded about the COTAD state things. I'm super excited about that. Thank you guys. I think I responded to everyone with you can email me, and we'll get a meeting together, and we'll get some action going. But as far as the curriculum goes, ACO accreditation, we had submitted a motion to the AOTA Representative Assembly earlier this year to look at accreditation standards from other health professions education to make recommendations along these kinds of lines for OT. It passed, however, it was kind of punted to the new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, the DEI task force that the AOTA has recently developed. So that is something that we may be hearing more about in the future, but also AOTA has a relatively new knowledge division within the staff structure. And at the recent board meeting, this was something that came up as an area of really connecting with educators and helping to equip them and empower them with resources and tools to be more effective in the areas of DEI in the future. So the timeline for that is difficult to say, and sort of the priorities. We talked a little bit in our group how often this is not something that people don't care about. It's on the list. It's one of many, many things, and it doesn't always bubble to the surface for people to make it onto a to-do list, or it might move down lower on the priority list, and it doesn't mean that they don't care, but it just might not be a priority. So that's why it is important to continue to advocate, continue to lead and make safe spaces for people to talk about these kind of topics and to share your stories. And sometimes that can be scary. I think it's really helpful to write it out beforehand, so you have it kind of in an outline before you talk about it. But we as individuals can continue to be a part of that change, and don't lose hope, because the very fact that we have made it through school and we're here, that's meaningful. That's from the work that people who came before us did for us as women, as men, as minorities. And so we can do something and continue to collaborate for that.
For sure. Thank you, Christina. Would anyone else like to share anything before we move on to the next slide? All right, well, in the vein of accountability, I'm going to kick it over to Adam to expound about accountability.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you guys for the discussion. It is amazing hearing all of this feedback and what you guys have put in motion at your workplaces and institutions. And just to kind of keep that conversation moving forward, not everybody is in the same point when it comes to some of this diversity, equity, and inclusion work and the anti-racism work. We are all kind of moving at different paces sometimes, and what helps to keep us moving in the same direction at least is having accountability partners. And so we referenced that question in the discussion prompts. And what I wanted to do is spend just a few minutes talking through what exactly an accountability partner looks like, you know, how to establish expectations, that sort of thing. And so for the first item, how do you define accountability? There are lots of different ways to define it, but one of the things that I think about is somebody or a group of people that have mutual expectations for an initiative or a policy or a strategy. And so these can be coworkers that, you know, have been ignited to do work, but maybe don't quite know exactly where to start. They could be, you know, coworkers or classmates or friends who would like to see change, but perhaps they don't quite know where to start yet, but there's a mutual understanding that something needs to be done. I think those would be good folks to become accountability partners with. You also want people who are truth tellers. And so, you know, as we've mentioned, I think in a couple of these Ignite calls, honesty is very key in a lot of these discussions. And sometimes telling the truth about diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism work, sometimes telling the truth is difficult. Sometimes it's hard to hear the truth and how other people might feel about you. And sometimes you might be saying things that may be offensive, but you don't quite know it. It takes an accountability partner or partners to really approach each other and make recommendations on how we can change our behaviors or make sure that what we're saying is respectful, what we're saying is productive, and is not tearing anybody down. And the truth becomes a big component of that. As far as defining and identifying a partner, I think about two different things. And so I talked about the shared interests before. I've worked in a number of different places that have had people across the spectrum who have identified racism, for example, as a problem. Some people see racism as, it's kind of an issue. Maybe it's not like the big thing we should focus on. I've worked with some people who have said, you know, racism does not really exist. Let's just do therapy in this therapy gym. We treat everybody the same. And so, you know, I think the key purpose of an accountability partner is working with somebody who you're kind of on a similar wavelength with. You maybe don't have to agree about everything, but if you can agree on, you know, the fact that racism is an issue or diversity is an issue at our company or workplace, equity is an issue, you know, inequality is an issue. If you can agree that these are things that we should work on, then I think that's somebody that could be a good accountability partner. And I think for setting up the partnership, Prabha had a really good quote in the chat. And it's, you know, the second part of that was follow through and consistency is the key. And so, you know, when you're working in a group or when you're working with another person, it's really good to establish measurable goals and objectives for what you're going to work on. And so if it is a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, what exactly do you want to get accomplished? Let's put it on paper. Let's make sure we have a mutual understanding of what we're going to work on. And then together, let's work on actionable next steps that we can move forward on together. And so whether that's keeping notes via email, whether it's, texting each other, whatever it is, creating next steps to help keep everybody on the same page is key for a lot of this movement. And then the communication piece is important. And I think this kind of follows back to the honesty piece, and that when you are working on some of these different initiatives or projects, you have to talk amongst each other. And, everybody's busy, everybody's got stuff to do, and every group is going to progress at their own pace. But I think as long as there's a shared understanding of, what the target dates are, target goals, what the next steps are, and as long as you keep talking about that, and as long as you share, what you're concerned about, what you're really enjoying, you can work together as a group to make sure that you're pushing things forward and that people are getting their needs met. And then establishing expectations is important as well. And so I think this is probably one of the key steps that I found works really well. When you're working with an accountability partner, you have to make sure that they are kind of on the same page with what they're expecting to get from the project or get from the initiative as well. If you're going into this project, for example, say there's going to be a journal club at your workplace about diversity, equity, and inclusion in OT. If you have an expectation that, we'll read a couple of journal articles here and there, maybe, once a quarter, and we'll see if we can, kind of discuss some of the salient points as a group whenever we get together. But the other person is thinking, well, we should meet quarterly, yes, but each month we need to come up with actionable next steps, and then we need to bring a proposal to the dean, or we need to bring a proposal to the program director for how to improve the workplace. If there are missed expectations, or if there are misalignment of expectations, then it's probably not going to work out. And so I think it's very important up front to be very clear about what the goals are of this group or the partnership, who's going to be doing what, when you want to get things accomplished by, and how you're going to pick each other up if some person kind of falls out or some person is slow to complete their objective. How are you going to come together as a group to just touch base on progress? Threw a lot at you guys, and I think that some of that is pretty intuitive, but it always helps to, kind of get a different perspective as well. I think Arameh is going to cover the next section, but I didn't know how we were doing on time and if anybody had any feedback about what I just said. Arameh, do we have time for that?
Yeah, time for feedback, absolutely. And that's when I go on mute.
So feel free to raise your hand or add questions or comments in the chat, or just kind of chime in, I should say.
We do want to say this is really one of our main action steps that we want you guys, as far as take home ideas, is this idea of accountability. So we would love to hear other ways that you guys have had accountability, or other people have been some accountability partners. We'd love to hear it.
Hey, Rame. This is Lexi. I just began participating in a climate committee in our department, and it's made up of students and faculty. And I think one of the ways that we keep each other, we're going to keep each other accountable, I guess, by having both groups together. It's not that you can say that this group said this or that group said that, and we're all committed together. And so if we're gonna do this together, we're gonna do this for one another. And so I think it's it's going to be more productive than having a separate faculty group and a separate, which we, have had before, faculty and student groups. I think having this group together for the climate in the department is going to make a big difference to hold one another accountable. So.
For sure. Thank you for sharing.
We have a great comment in our chat. Mira, as far as DEI work, one thing that I've done with my friend is that we've also checked with each other with different forms of oppression. I would love to hear more of what the different forms of oppression and how basically I think you've checked in with each other about it. That's really awesome.
Yeah, so I accidentally typed a little too fast here, and
I was trying to get it for you. I didn't want to mess it up. I'm like, I'm trying to. Go ahead and elaborate.
So one thing one of my friends and I continue to do with each other is that in addition to checking each other for whenever we use different forms of oppression, or whenever we learn about different forms of oppression in DEI and justice work, including homophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and the big one for us is ableism, we also just make sure to give each other resources for that, because we know that we have agreed on being genuine with each other and just having that mutual agreement, like what was said earlier from Adam, I think. And it's helped us grow our relationship more, and it also helps us continue to keep each other in check. So again, I apologize for typing too fast and then sending it.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's really good feedback to keep in mind that there are lots of forms of inequity. And I think that, we're all on different parts of the spectrum as far as knowing what these forms of inequity are, how to combat them. Just like some of us arrived at this anti-racism conversation perhaps a little bit later than others, which is okay. We're all here together now. Some people are really just now making sure that they're not adopting ableist language and frameworks in the workplace. Even as an OT, you have to break out of that, right? So thank you so much for that feedback. Anybody else? Cassandra.
I know I have a little bit of difficulty keeping people in check, because I feel like whenever I attempt to say like, oh, hey, like, maybe we should talk more about this. Maybe this is something, like, I feel like this is an issue. I feel like I come across as like attacking the other person, because usually the conversation ends in a very, very abrupt and poor way. And I wanted to know if there was any advice when talking to friends and family about how to make sure that the conversation doesn't dissolve, but also setting boundaries at the same time.
Yes, excellent question. I can give my feedback on that, and then I can take a step back and allow anybody else to give feedback as well. One of the things that we discussed on the outset of this Ignite call is the use of I statements. And what that establishes is that, as you're discussing a sensitive topic with somebody, or if somebody crossed the line, or if they, made what I like to call an ouch or oops statement, I feel offended when you use this. And so it is not accusatory. It turns the language towards yourself, and then you proceed with giving some feedback that may or may not be received well. But I think the I statements have been shown to be a good way to start that conversation. And perhaps you're already doing that, but does anybody else have any feedback on that?
I think we may have some in the chat. One feedback or comment.
Yeah, one of the things that I have learned is to not let things go when you experience or see unfair treatment. I usually address it privately privately, if it is at work or family. It may not always go the way you imagine, but it is certainly an effort that I've made. And I think that's a good point. If you see something, call it out, say something. You know, I've personally, I can't speak for everybody else, but personally, I've had to work on my assertiveness. In the past, somebody might say something offensive, and I'll just kind of let it slide because I didn't like confrontation. It just it took practice for me to be able to say, you know what you said just then was incorrect, or, you know, I felt kind of offended by what you just told me. It takes practice, but it's good to call it out as soon as it happens.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, in the interest of time, we can move on. I can pass it to Arameh, and then if you guys have any other feedback about accountability or how to lift each other up, hold folks accountable, please feel free to add it in the chat as well.
That was an excellent discussion, Adam. I wanted to keep going, but I guess in closing now, may we move on to the next slide, please. We are closing. Oh man. So, okay. So you guys, when I was reflecting on this closing, I realized our first event was on June 6th, literally 2 months ago, 8 weeks ago. And several of you guys have attended each session. We thank everyone for your commitment to attending all or a few or even just one session. We just thank all of you guys. This Ignite session or series was specifically about anti-racism. And even if the hype may seem to fade or media isn't shedding light on these issues as much, we must remain consistent. So Pradha, when you mentioned that, I was like, did you read my conclusion, my closing remarks? Because it's all about consistency. Being vocal, strategic, and action-oriented is important in many contexts, in our communities, within academia, at our place of work, and within our households. It is these consistent efforts that ignite the change we want to see. Now, although creating and making a list of demands shows your need, and efforts like this are all very needed, it is so important to understand and prioritize processes, policies, and strategies to make sustainable changes. So what happens when nationwide protest stops, or supporting Black businesses is not on the top of everyone's minds, or making that donation to an anti-race organization lessens, or posting Black Lives Matter isn't on trend anymore? What happens when social media isn't flooding with a post of anti-racist quotes, when it's not in front of your face? And to be honest, it's already happening less and less. Will this be just a moment of time, a moment of activism, or will we remain consistent? So I say hashtag KTSE. This is from my good sister, Tiana Taylor. And that means keep that same energy. Please keep it. Holding our profession accountable for developing standards and initiatives that focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice is key. Accreditation standards, practice standards, diverse representation standards, holistic admissions, all of the above and so much more. Keep the same energy and prioritize your strategic efforts. This is where COTAD's accountability, the discussion that we just had, our charge to you, becomes even more relevant. We have discussed lived experiences. We have shared different experiences and perspectives. We have listened and we have learned, but remaining aligned with the spirit of energy and consistency, we must continue this dialogue. So therefore, Ignite will continue with Ignite 2. We are so happy to talk about it. This will focus specifically on addressing institutional and programmatic changes. You don't have to move that yet, in a 4-part series. Now, personally, I've mentioned in the past that I've been speaking to a lot of, like within the last 2 months and within like up till now, throughout now, I've heard so many students like heartbreaking stories about systemic and institutional barriers. And COTAD has also heard similar stories from program directors and faculty about these barriers. And individuals know that these barriers impact our occupational therapy educational system, which ultimately impacts our profession as a whole. And because they exist, we are committed to analyzing ways to address these issues and eliminate these barriers. So COTAD, we are here for the long-term change, you guys. And so we thank you for being part of the COTAD family and for joining in your efforts to keep that same energy, because the change is happening and the change is now. In closing, I want to leave you guys with this quote. Tolerance, intercultural dialogue, and respect for diversity are more essential than ever in a world where people are becoming more and more closely interconnected. Y'all, if we don't stay consistent and keep this energy, this will just fall on the wayside. We will continue, and I'm just so excited. So I want to thank you all, and I want to continue on to the next slide to share our flyer. I am so excited about this next Ignite series, which will be really specifically about COTAD Ed. Lexi, who is on this call, is going to be the rock star behind all this. And our next one will be August 20th. We will have our Eventbrite up right after this. You will be able to register. This is really focusing on systemic, institutional, programmatic changes within our educational system. We will be sharing different topics each event, just like this one, and we're excited to talk about our first one on August 20th. You can also make sure to follow us on all of our socials. Our socials have been going wild this past Ignite series. We're very excited for all the new COTAD family members that we have joining our social media. On our next slide, I am even more excited because we also have our wonderful Whitney Harris, our first ever COTAD chapter chair, who started this book club plus idea. And this is going to be our second event, which will be a video. We're going to be watching a movie, and this will be August 25th. So we are keeping that energy and we are staying consistent. We have events upon events. So join, register. This is also going to be up. Whitney, we are so very proud of you. And the first one was so awesome, and we're so excited to have this one as our second one. Join it, register, check the chat. Stephanie just put it in. We'd love to see all of you guys on. And our next slide also just talks about our resources. We don't want to leave without giving you guys tangible resources. This is something that we developed when we released the first ever series, first ever event on June 6th. And I also want to share that we are having a wonderful, Emily is also on this call, all of our wonderful leaders, a wonderful member rollout. So stay tuned to hear more about this membership rollout, how you can be a member of COTAD, how you can get involved. But I just want to tell you it's coming soon. Just put your ears and eyes open so that you can check out our membership rollout. Other than that, I think we are done, y'all. Do you have any other questions? Next slide. I think that's it. I can't believe we did it. Other than that, it is 8 minutes before. We love to have people end on time, and we respect your time. It is 5:22 over here on the West Coast. It's still light outside. More importantly, I have to thank all of our COTAD leaders for being on this call, for being behind the scenes, for being on social media, for moving the slides, for playing the music, and all of our wonderful facilitators who've been a part of this Ignite series. Thank you so much to all of our participants for all of your wonderful discussion. We really do hope that you can utilize some of these tools and also utilize each other as a network and a resource to continue to build community. We thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next Ignite series. Other than that, can we play our out music? And we thank you, and feel free to say anything, but we're going to leave it with some wonderful Lauryn Hill. Also, check out our playlist because it's bomb, and it's on our YouTube.